Good afternoon. Hi, lockdown learners. It's Friday for those in live stream world, and it's the end of our week and the end day 42. And what other things is it? Last day before a week off from lockdown learning, which maybe you'll be relieved about, maybe not. I don't really know. But I think 9 weeks in, it probably is time for us all to take a little break, take stock, and see where we go from here. So what I wanted to do today is a little bit different from what we've been doing up until now. So we've very much been focusing on progression from day to day, really. So we've been moving through various lessons which have mostly had some sort of logical connection to each other, whether you've necessarily thought so at the time or not. I'm not really, I don't know, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but there has been, for me at least, there's been a plan so far to get from day 1 through to day 41. That plan may have developed as we've gone along. I may not have known all of that plan right at the beginning, but I had a vague idea of where we were going to go. But today we're going to do something that's a little bit disconnected from everything that we've been doing so far. That doesn't necessarily fit in with what we've been doing and doesn't have a logical flow. But I thought, since it was our last day before a break, it's a little bit of your bring your toys to school last day before the holidays feel to the whole thing. So I thought we would do something a little bit different. So today I'm going to spend the time looking at RMarkdown, and I'll explain what RMarkdown is as we go. I do want to do one little piece of housekeeping first before we finish, which is to respond to a question on the live chat that came in very late in the day yesterday, and I did answer it in the live chat after I'd finished talking. But I just wanted to address it on the live stream for those people who may have logged off, and also for people who aren't watching live, so aren't necessarily following the chat. And that is somebody asked, I think it was Graham asked, about why the outliers in the heat map that we drew yesterday. I'm sorry if you tuned in having not seen yesterday's, me having told everybody on Twitter and on Slack that you didn't necessarily need to have seen any previous lessons to deal with this one, but this is going to be very quick. So yesterday, especially for those who haven't got this far, we produced this heat map, which is 2 sets of log fold changes, and we don't need to go any deeper into it than that. And we spent a little bit of time getting the color scheme sorted so that it went from the minimum fold change to the maximum fold change and had this inflection point at 0, so that the negative fold changes were blue and the positive fold changes were red. And what we ended up with was this quite washed out heat map with an awful lot of kind of whitey grey, pale pinks in it, because we have these very large outliers in the fold change. We have a small number of genes which have extreme fold changes, down to sort of -6 or so, and up as far as +20. And that means that those very strong colours, the strong blue and the strong reds, are taken by those outliers, and then everything else in the middle, and the vast majority of these observations are going to be between probably +2 and -2. Those remaining observations have this middle range, which is all very pale blue and pale pink, and not very strongly coloured. So I just wanted to very quickly say that we can rather than scaling from the minimum to the maximum numbers in our matrix, we can instead scale between a little range in the middle and then have everything that's outside of that range take the maximum value. So effectively take the darkest color or the lightest color. So at the moment, our breaks, which is what we use to scale the colors here, go from the minimum value in a matrix to the maximum value in the matrix. And what we can do is we can scale that. So instead of going to the minimum, it just goes to -2. And instead of going to the maximum, it just goes to +2. And then when we draw the heat map, you don't get those extremes pulling your color scale out so that everything is just colored in the middle. So everything is kind of white or pale blue or pale pink. And instead, the extremes are still coloured in at the extreme colours, but you get a little bit of a darker, a bit of a bolder heat map. But obviously you can't see what the extremes of the distribution are anymore because we've scaled it between just that middle range. I think it makes a slightly bolder heat map, but maybe is slightly misleading as to actually what's going on. So I just wanted to address that as kind of a bit of housekeeping from yesterday. And now we will move on to talk about RMarkdown. Okay, so I'm gonna save that script, and then I'm going to close all of my little bits of data that I've got open. But what I'm then going to do is start a new project. So we did all of our RNA-Seq analysis in a project on its own, and I'm going to start a new project to demonstrate RMarkdown today. So I'm going to click on the Create a Project button here, and that will close the current workspace. So it's going to prompt me to save my existing workspace, because it's going to close this workspace and open a new workspace in my new project that I'm about to create. So I'll save my workspace, which will take a couple of seconds because I've got quite a lot of data in it. And then we're going to start a new project, and we're going to start a new project in a brand new directory. Okay, so we're going to click New Directory. It's going to be a new project. So I'm going to click New Project. And we're going to create it in a subdirectory of home/lockdown learning. And I'm going to call it RMarkdown example. Okay, so we're going to create a project, and that will close my existing project and then open up a new project in which I'm going to do my demonstrations for RMarkdown. Okay, while I'm waiting for that to go, Romina has asked a question: can I delete the data files for the 48 RNA-Seq runs after today? Yes, I don't think we're going to come back to the fast queue anytime soon. So feel free to delete that fast queue. I'm not envisaging coming back to it, not at any point in the very near future anyway. And you've already got a script you've always got a script to re-download it if you absolutely need it anyway. Right, so here's our new. This is our new project. So it's a whole new session, R session. So R has restarted. My environment is empty. I have no scripts open. I have nothing because this is completely new. So let's talk a little bit about RMarkdown. So what is RMarkdown? It's an environment for creating what we call literate documents. So these are documents which mingle programming code that you can actually execute and text that isn't executable. So it's what's called it's referred to as an authoring framework for R, or for data science more generally. So it's a framework whereby we can write a document like a report or even a whole paper in in RStudio, so in using RStudio as our authoring environment, and it has live code, and it has code inside that document that we can execute. So it can be an extremely useful way of authoring documents, and allows you to mix text and code in a way that you can compile the two together and make a proper document out of it. And RStudio has extremely deep support for RMarkdown built in to the environment. So RStudio is a really good environment for writing RMarkdown documents. So in order to begin, we need to create an RMarkdown document. It again it's a text document. Like any script, an RMarkdown document is a text document. It's a text document that we can convert into another format when the time is right. So we are going to create a new file. So I've clicked on the new file icon up in the top left hand corner of RStudio, but instead of creating a script this time, so instead of opening a new script, we're instead going to open an RMarkdown document. So this is going to create us a new RMarkdown document. Okay, so let's click on RMarkdown, and this brings up a dialog to let you set up your first RMarkdown file. So we can give our documents some metadata. So we can give it a title, we can give it a named author, and we can decide what type of output we want from our RMarkdown document. We can change any of this at any point in the future. So I'm going to just call it RMarkdown example, and I'm the author, and I want it to produce HTML when I want to convert it. So as a first port of call, I want it to produce me a nice little, essentially a nice little web page. So we're going to hit OK, and that will create us our little RMarkdown document. So this has created a document for us with some things already in it, and I'll just quickly talk through some of these things to tell you about them. So an RMarkdown file, which is what this is our first RMarkdown file, contains 3 elements, 2 of which are elements that can repeat. Okay, so the first element is at the top, and it is defined only once, and this is a chunk of metadata in a format called YAML, Y-A-M-L, and this describes some settings for the file, and there are these are key value pairs, so there are certain keys that are allowed, and then those keys are assigned values. So we have a title and an author, where we set those up when we created the file, and also we set up the output when we created a file. So so we said we wanted the output to be HTML, so it's defined that for us in this header, and we can change this if we want. So if we want to output to something other than HTML, we can change this output declaration here to be something different. So you could change it to be, if you wanted a PDF instead, you could say output me a PDF document rather than an HTML document, but we'll leave it HTML for now. So you can change these, you can add different settings at the top, and there's a specification which you can track down online for the things that you can affect in this header. Then the second element, the second type of content that you have in your RMarkdown file, is a code chunk. Okay, so this is a code chunk here, these 3 lines. The code chunks are set between these are called backticks, these 3 backtick characters. So you've got 3 backticks to open a code chunk, and then 3 backticks to close a code chunk. And then everything in between those backticks is code that is going to be executed when we create the HTML document that this RMarkdown file can be translated into. So this is code that will be executed when this document is converted to HTML. So in here, this is setting a particular global option for this particular document. We don't need to worry too much about what's going on there. But this is a chunk, what's called a code chunk. And you can have multiple code chunks in your file. You can have as many code chunks as you want within your file. The other thing that you can have as many if you want of is the third content type, and that is a block of text. So this is a block of text here. And this has been just added by default when we created this new RMarkdown document at the beginning of this session. So this is a chunk of text. It's effectively plain text, and when you render this document, so when you turn this document into its HTML output, this text will be included in that HTML output as text, and it uses a syntax called Markdown. So this is the reason why this is called RMarkdown. The Markdown syntax is a formatting syntax for turning plain text into. Originally, it was for turning plain text into HTML, but it can also be used via particular types of software, and RMarkdown being one of them, into PDF, Word documents, and various other things. So Markdown is a relatively simple syntax for producing rich content. So you can see some features of Markdown just in these couple of paragraphs of text here. So these two hashes here, in the case of Markdown, they don't denote a comment like they do in code. What they denote here is this is a heading. So this is setting up a heading in the resulting output. Then we've got a bunch of paragraph text, and then here we've got a link, and this link, which will appear as is in the text, but will be converted into a hyperlink to this particular web page. Use that, and the angle brackets denote that. And in the resulting output, you will just get a link. The angle brackets will disappear, and then the asterisks here. This is saying that you want this particular block of text, to be in bold. Okay, so the pair of asterisks will mean that the word in between them will be rendered in bold in the resulting document. And there's a whole set of little bits of syntax like this in Markdown, which enable you to produce rich text content from just a plain text document. So Markdown's really nice for that, and you can have, again, multiple blocks of text that separate or go between your code chunks. So here we've got a code chunk, and then a block of text, and then another code chunk, and then another block of text, and so on. Okay, so this is the basic layout of an RMarkdown document. You have a block of YAML metadata at the top that's separated by these three dashes. So you've got 3 dashes at the beginning of the metadata, 3 dashes at the end. Then you have code chunks, which are delimited by the 3 backticks, and then everything else is text. Okay, so we can delete all of this if we want to. So let's do that. Yeah, let's do that. We just delete all of the content and get rid of it, and so we can start including our own content. Okay, so I've left the header, but I've deleted all of the rest of the content. And I'm going to start adding my own content in text and code chunks. And so what I'm going to use for a few examples just early on is some of the examples that are on the RStudio website that gives the kind of documentation for RMarkdown. So I'm just going to include a couple of their examples just to demonstrate the functionality of RMarkdown to begin with, and then just towards the end we will maybe we'll just include one of our plots from one of the earlier lessons, so that we can see some of our stuff in action, some of our plots that we've produced over the last couple of weeks in action. Okay, so in order to get this working, we first of all we need a library call. So to be able to include your libraries, so in order to attach your packages in RMarkdown, you need a code chunk, because if it's not in a code chunk, it doesn't get executed. So a code chunk is set up like this. You do 3 backticks, and then you open a curly bracket, a curly brace, like that. And RStudio is nice for us, and it automatically puts in the second one into the file. And then this is a chunk of R. So you tell it that it's a chunk of R by putting R in. And then you can optionally you can give it a name. So we can call it load packages. And after the name, then if you put a comma, then you can put options, what are called chunk options in, and chunk options put in settings for this particular chunk. So they let you change the configuration, the way that RMarkdown interprets this chunk. And because RMarkdown is kind of deeply embedded in RStudio, it's part of the RStudio kind of forms the authoring environment. So all of those options are available to us in our little autocomplete dialog that RStudio gives us. So once we've put the comma, we get this little drop down for all of those possible chunk options that we could include. Okay, so I'm going to use the include option, and then for some of these it will give you the possible values as well. So RMarkdown, it really is deeply embedded in RStudio. RStudio is making it, relatively speaking, is making it quite easy for me to work with this document. So once I'd put include as my chunk option, then RStudio knows that include can only take a logical value. So it's giving me the options true or false, and I'm going to say false. So what this means is that this particular chunk won't be included in the output. So the chunk will be executed, it will be run, and any results from this chunk will be available in subsequent chunks. I don't like the word chunk, but I'm just having to keep saying it. But so any output from any results from this chunk, any variables that we create, anything that we do, will be available to subsequent chunks. But the actual output itself and the code won't be included in our final document. So for this kind of housekeeping that you do at the top, this can be quite a useful thing to do. So then any code goes inside the chunk, and then you finish it off with 3 backticks, and 3 backticks closes this chunk of code, and anything outside of this is going to be considered to be text. If you want to configure a chunk, so change these chunk options once you've defined it, once you've started writing it, then there is a little settings button that pops up in the chunk at the top, and so we can click on that if we want, and that gives us some options that we can change if we want to. So we can turn certain things off, so set warnings to be true or false, show messages to be true or false, and so on and so on and so on. So this can be quite useful. So let's click apply on that. So again, this is RStudio. This is all a feature of RStudio, being very nice to us, and giving us these really nice user-friendly tools for working with this kind of data. In this first chunk, I'm just going to attach a package, and I'm going to attach a package called Viridis, which you should, if you've done any of my R tutorial, pretty much any of my R lessons to date, you should already have Viridis installed, because it's a dependency of an awful lot of other packages. So it will have been installed at least by DSeq2, I believe, but probably other packages as well require it as a dependency. So we're just going to load Viridis. Viridis gives you some quite nice color schemes. That's the purpose of the package, among other things, I think. But so we're just going to load that, and then we're going to have, outside of our chunk, we're going to put some text. So let's write some text. So this is a heading. So the hash character turns it into a heading, and then we're going to just write some lorem ipsum, basically some space filling text. So this is a paragraph of text markdown lets us format the text in bold with 2 asterisks, italics with a single asterisk, as code with backtick, single backticks. Lets you do code formatting. And if you want to do links with alternative text like this, then you can do square brackets for the text, followed by round brackets with the URL. Okay, so and that doesn't have to be like the full HTTPS : etc. URL. You can just put the short URL, and your browser will deal with that. Okay, so that's a little bit of formatting. We can also have lists, so we can have bulleted lists. So this is a bulleted, can't spell, list. Some more text here, and then here we go. This is a numbered list. Okay, so this is all syntax provided by Markdown. So just thought I'd kind of demonstrate this as I go. A bulleted list, you've got a space and then an asterisk, and then your whatever you want in your list, and that as long as you keep the space and then the asterisks at the beginning of the line, then each one of these things will be a new bullet. For a numbered list, it works like this: with you've still got the space at the beginning, and then you've got a number followed by a dot, then with a space, and then the thing that you want in your list. And this number can be arbitrary. So as long as it's a numerical character, it can be 1, it can be 2. You can have You can have a progression if you want, and this will turn into a numbered list. I usually just use 1 because then if I want to reorder my list at any point, it's easy to do and it doesn't look ugly. But that will be formatted as a numbered list, okay, by Markdown, and it's Markdown formatting that deals with that. It's also possible, here we go, final example, some maths. So it's also possible to get nicely formatted equations by putting, if you put your equation in between dollar signs like that, then this will be interpreted. You see RStudio is behaving nicely for me here and showing me a preview of how it's going to be formatted. So this is formatted using LaTeX. So if you know anything about LaTeX, if you've ever heard of LaTeX, which is it's a document format and a programming language actually in its own right, which physicists and mathematicians use for formatting documents. And this is what's called LaTeX Math Mode, and that will allow you to nicely format equations within your document. So anything that you put between dollar delimiters will be formatted using LaTeX formatting. So we can put equations into our text as well in that way. Okay, and then we can have another code chunk, and this time we're going to include this code chunk. So we're going to call it figure 1, and we're going to include it in our output. So include equals this time true. True is the default for include, so we don't necessarily need to be explicit about that. And we're going to use the visualise package alongside an attached dataset called Volcano. So image and Volcano with a color scheme. So col equals, and we're using this visualise function from the package that we attached, and this is a number of colors. So what this is going to do is it's going to produce this image with Volcano as the argument, produces a like a landscape map of the Maunga volcano that I can't pronounce in New Zealand. So it produces like a contour map of this volcano, and then we're doing that with this particular visualise color scheme. So that's what this is going to produce, and then we've got so then we'll do the same. We're going to put in a second figure, and here is an alternative color scheme. So what we're going to do for that then is another code chunk for figure 2. We'll leave the include as the default this time, just to show you that it includes it anyway. Okay, and then we want image, volcano again, and this time our col is visualise 200, but we want to change an option, and it's slightly weird, so it's option equals A in capitals like that, and that changes the color scheme for a different version of the same color scheme. Okay, so this is our RMarkdown document. So let's save this as example 1. Let's save that. So it saves it as a .rmd file by default. And now we can render this. So we can use the RMarkdown package in R to render this document, and it will open it in our viewer. So there's a function for that, and it's in the RMarkdown package, and it's called render. and it takes a file name. So in this case, it's example1.rmd. So this is a little bit like the view function for a data frame. So the view function gives us a special little data browser in RStudio, which we can use to kind of browse data frames. The render function here is going to take this document and it's going to turn it into a nicely displayed document. It's going to interpret the markdown and the code chunks and turn it into a nice little document in our RStudio viewer. So that's what's happening there. Is okay, so it's rendered it, and it's rendered it to an HTML file, which now we can open by clicking on it. He said, I don't know why it's produced two of them. Let's just refresh that. There we go, that's better. So there you go, open in editor, view in web browser. So if we want to edit the HTML, we can, or we can view it in a web browser and it will open in my browser. So I'm just going to rip that off there. Whoopsies. Apologies. Let me go back. Sorry about that. Right, okay. Should have known better than to try that. There we go. Put that on screen. So this is in Chrome. This is in my browser. And it's rendered my document into this, into an HTML document. So it's taken me from my RMarkdown plain text mixture of code and writing with particular kind of formatting into this formatted HTML document. And you can see that, so that my first code chunk, which had include equals false in it, that's not in this document, whereas the second code chunk down here is. So you can see the code there. This is all of my text, and it's all been formatted via Markdown. So you can see the heading is nice and big. There we've got bold, we've got italics, we've got code formatted here. We've got a link, so this will this should link us out. Actually, it looks like it's a relative link, so maybe I should have been a bit more savvy about how I produce that. And my lists, so I've got a bulleted list here, and I've got a numbered list. And then you see, despite the fact that all of the numbers in my document were ones, in my final output it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because Markdown has interpreted this document correctly. And the LaTeX, so my little math mode LaTeX equation has been rendered nice and prettily. So I've got the superscript 2 and things like that in there. So that's quite nice as well. And then you can see the code in the second code chunk. So because of the default settings of the code chunks, the actual code itself is printed out into my document. But as well as the code, we get the results of the code. So this is the output from this line of R. Okay, so that line of R produces this picture, and that picture is rendered into our document. So not only do we get the code, but we get the results of the code. And anything which you do within a chunk, the results of that are then available in the subsequent chunks as well. So if we create a variable in this chunk, this is the second chunk actually, but if we create a variable in that second chunk, we can then use that variable in the subsequent chunks, in the third and the fourth and the fifth chunk, and so on. So that's the output from that particular chunk. This is the contour map of that particular volcano, rendered with this Viridis color scale, which is quite a nice, is a relatively nice color scale, I think. And then the second figure, so here's the second code chunk. This time we've set this option, we've given it this option which changes the color scheme from the default Viridis color scheme to what's called Magma, the Magma color scheme, which is again is a relatively nice color scheme. So I think that's a relatively straightforward example of how this works. We've got a mixture of text which has been formatted nicely and code where the code has also been formatted nicely, but has also been executed, and the results end up in your document. Okay, so that has produced me that output in an HTML page. If I want to change my output format, I can do it trivially. So instead of, if I want to produce a PDF instead of a page of HTML, I can do that by changing the output to PDF_document instead of HTML_document. And I'm just going to make this into a proper link while I'm at it. And now, if I render this again, so if I re-render this file, so I just rerun the render command that I ran in my console before, instead of producing HTML, it will produce the render command will produce a PDF instead. Why is it creating HTML? Why I order? Okay, I thought I was being clever then. Oh, it's because I haven't saved it. Save it, Simon, and then render it. So I had to save the file and then render it. And this time it's produced, instead of producing a PDF, HTML, sorry, it should have produced a PDF. And it looks like it has. So we'll click on the PDF and there you go. That's the same document. This time, instead of being rendered to HTML, it's been rendered to PDF. So this is a PDF. It contains exactly the same contents as we had before. So we've still got our RMarkdown example. We've got the heading, which is nice and big and bold. We've got the text, which is formatted, bold and italics, and pre-formatted as monospaced font and things. The link still works. It's a link, and you can see it's out to. It's not obvious that it's a link, but it is a link out to YouTube. We've got a bulleted list. We've got a numbered list, and then we've got our code chunk. Oh, sorry, our maths has been rendered nicely. We've got our code chunk, and you can see we've got the output of the code chunk. So there's our code. That's our chunk of code and the output from that chunk of code. And then we've got, it's by default it's in A4 pages or maybe US letter. I'm not sure. But then it paginates properly as well. And on the second page, we have our second figure, again with the heading and with the text, with the code, and then the output from the code in our PDF. So hopefully you can see from this that you can go quite rapidly from code to a relatively professional looking document, and it's actually quite easy to format these documents once you get used to working with RMarkdown. So I'm just going to change my output back to HTML so that I can show you a few other things before we run out of time. So okay, let's do a couple of other things. First things first. Let's just have a look at a couple of options. So you can there are lots of options for chunks, which you're able to use to configure the output in certain ways. So this chunk options link here opens up a web page. So when I clicked that, it opened up a web page, and and this is all of the documentation for all of the chunk options. But also, so you can find out all of the chunk options that are available here. Also, you remember you've got your tab completion available to you, so you can put a comma, and then it gives you all of the available chunk options pop up in this box. So let's just show you some examples. So you can put a caption on your figure. So figure 2 magma color scheme to give it a caption. That's right. You can change the dimensions of the figure if you want. I can't remember what the default is, but you can do figure height. And I usually find that setting that to 10 makes your figures taller than they are by default. So you can use the figure height to change the size of your figures as they output. And if you just change the height or just change the width, it scales it in proportion. So it keeps a link between the height and the width, should you want it to. And somebody's asked about where the images are being stored. So yes, by default, they are encoded in the output file. So the images are encoded in that HTML. You can, if you cache a block, so if you set cache equal to true, then when you cache a block, it gets executed when you render your file for the first time, and the output gets saved. And then the next time you run it, if you haven't changed this chunk, then it will just reuse the saved output. But if you change the chunk, it will regenerate it. So caching is really useful for chunks which might take a long time to execute. So you write the chunk once, you execute it once, and all of the output from that chunk is saved. And I'll show you how that works in the file browser here. So you can see in the file browser here, as I've been working, as I've rendered my documents in whatever formats, they've appeared here as HTML and PDF files. When we render this with caching turned on for a chunk, then we'll see that there are more files that get created the next time that we render this. So I've turned it back to HTML. I've rendered that. I'm just going to do one more chunk with one more example, and that is showing you how a table works. Okay, so let's here actually let's have another heading. This is a heading level 2, and underneath that, let's compare that to a heading level 3. See what difference it makes. Depends on your CSS really, but here is a table example. So we need another code chunk. Table 1. I'm not going to put any other options into this chunk this time. So we need a data frame. So where are we going to get a data frame from? Let's read a file in, and in order to do that, we need our reader package. So let's load that. Reader. Okay, and let's read from our COVID RNA-Seq directory. Let's read in our filtered NHBE results file that we created. Okay, so data, let's just call it DAT. Okay, that's common convention for R when you read in a data frame. So read TSV, and this file is one directory up because I'm in the lockdown learning RMarkdown example directory. I want to go into the COVID COVID RNA-Seq directory, and I want to read in the filtered NHB results.txt file. I'll read that by default, and then let's have a look at how that print. If we just print that data frame out in this particular block of code, let's have a look at what it looks like. Okay. So there we go. That's an example of a table. So we'll save this, save it here, and then we will render it. Off we go. So now it's recreated example1.html. It's in my RMarkdown directory. So one thing worth noting at this point is when we rendered it this time, as well as getting the HTML outputted, we also got these two directories created. And this is because we switched on the cache for one of our chunks. So because we switched on the cache for figure 2, we now have these directories which will contain some of the images. So we've got the images particularly in there, and the data will be in there in the files as well. So there's all sorts of information that's then written to the disk when you turn caching on. But we have reproduced our example1 HTML file. So let's take another look at that in our browser. So it's the same as before. All of this is the same because we've not changed it, and we've not changed figure 2 either, except that we changed the height of figure 2. So you can see it's got taller. It doesn't fit in my window neatly anymore. We also gave it a caption. So we gave this chunk the option fig.cap, and that caption has been printed out underneath the figure. Okay, so that's the caption for the figure which travels along with it. And then we added an extra chunk which gives me heading. So we had some text in between, and then our table example. So we read in our TSV file. This is the output from reading in the TSV file, which has been printed out just like the output. This is effectively our standard out from running that particular command. So that's been printed out by the RMarkdown rendering. It's printed out the output from that command, and then we've run dat just to print the data frame, and it's printed it like this. It's printed it as it would have printed it if we were running this at the console. So it's just given us the tibble preview that you get when you print tibbles at the console. If you want this to be prettier than this, there are a couple of options. The easiest one is there's a chunk option, which I haven't tested before, so we're going to see if this works, but I noticed it when I was looking at chunk options before. So if we click on the little cog for chunk settings, there's an option which is use paged tables, and I wonder if we turn this on and click apply and then save again, render again, and refresh our browser. What I hope is that this is really simple. Doesn't seem to have changed anything. No, okay, so that didn't do what I expected it to do. Never mind. Okay, so that wasn't that simple. There is a way of doing it, which is to use a function from a package called knitter. So we'll load the package, library knit r. Okay, So that's the package that we need. And then there's a function which is called cable, which will format that table for us in a nice, pretty way. Hopefully this will work better. So again, we will save our RMarkdown file, and then we'll render our RMarkdown file. And this time when I refresh, what you should find is that instead of just printing out the console version of our data frame, it's actually produced us a table, an HTML table, which contains all of our data. It's quite wide and not necessarily the neatest output in the world, but at least that is our table as we wanted it. Okay, so it is relatively easy to produce a nice, convenient, pretty table from the output. Okay, so that's covered quite a lot of what RMarkdown can do. I just want to talk about two more things. So the first of which is that code chunks don't have to be R. Okay, so RMarkdown is capable of interpreting not just R, but other things as well. So you can have your code chunk, instead of being an R code chunk, you can do a bash code chunk. And a bash code chunk will, as we're suggesting here, will execute bash commands. So ls-l, let's do -l-h, the current working directory, that's a little bit of bash. And that will be executed by this chunk as bash. And you can also, in the same document, this is all one document, we can also have a Python chunk. So not just R, not just bash, but Python and other things as well. So you could also have not just bash and Python, there are other languages available. So you can have SQL, you can have JavaScript and other things as well. So you can have chunks with different programming languages in, and you can have them all in the same document. So let's just do a little bit of Python. Okay, so this then, if we rendered that document, then that is missing a package. So it's complained because it can't render the Python because it's missing this package called reticulate. So we need to install that. So we'll do that in a second. That seems to be the only error. So let's install. We've been doing it with Bioinformatics Manager, haven't we? So let's do the same. Install reticulate. So we'll install that, and that should enable us to render the document with a Python chunk. So redo the render. Oh my goodness. Non-system installation of Python could not be found. Oh wow, this is getting complicated. I'm just going to say yes. Let's install Conda. We're familiar with Conda. We've installed it before. I'm just not in my VM, so it's installing it on my Mac, which is fine. I don't mind installing Conda. So apparently it doesn't like using the system Python. I don't really know why that might be. Okay, away it goes. Come on, because I've got one other thing I want to demonstrate. So it's just installing Conda for me. Slightly more than I wanted it to do, but never mind. It's because I haven't done this before. This is the first time I've tried to include a Python chunk in an RMarkdown document. So this is new for me, as well as for you. So I didn't necessarily expect it to take this long. There you go. It's installing all sorts of stuff under the hood. Nearly there. Must be nearly there now. And then we're going to have our brand new shiny HTML document, this time with some Python executed in it. Okay, so while this is running, I'm just going to talk about the other thing that I want to talk about, and that's notebooks. So this is a Markdown document, and you can compile your Markdown document using the render function into a static HTML or PDF or even a Word document if you want to. A notebook is a more interactive document. So a notebook you compile into a notebook HTML file, which contains not only the output, but also the RMarkdown as well. So you can distribute a notebook, and not only do you distribute the output from it, but you also distribute the code which underlies that document. So notebooks are quite good as interactive and collaborative documents. And I do quite often use notebooks when I'm developing new analysis rather than doing it in a script or in a Markdown document. I will develop it in a notebook because it's much easier to kind of iterate in a notebook than it is in a static Markdown document. Let's just show you this because that's finished now. So here we go. This is my my RMarkdown example, and if we go through this, you will see at the bottom we've got the output from our bash command. So that's ls as executed by bash. ls in R does something completely different. It lists the variables current in your current environment in R, and it has to be done ls with brackets like any other R function. So that's a bit of bash that's been executed in the document, and here's some Python that's been executed in the document as well. So this is valid Python executed within our Markdown document. So that's quite nifty, I think. It's really quite clever. I'm not sure of the answer to that question. Is it possible to use variables made in Python or Perl in R? I've got no idea, I'm afraid. I don't know. I would have to experiment and see if that's possible. Right, so final example then, before I sign off, and it's getting late, it is quite late already, but final example then is a notebook. And what we'll do is we will just take the content that we've got here and we'll put it into a notebook. I'll leave off the mixed. You might get a bash error on Windows where you might not have bash installed. So we'll copy and paste that. We'll copy that. Sorry, we'll create a new document as an R notebook. So rather than R Markdown, now we're creating an R notebook. So again, it's produced us an example document, an empty or a document with some example things in it. We'll populate it with the code that we've already written, and I'll just show you a nice feature of the notebook, which is we do get interactive tables with the notebook by default. Okay, so this code is exactly the same as the code that we had previously. It's just in a notebook this time. It's going to be rendered to a notebook this time rather than a document. Sorry, rather than a static HTML document. So we can preview this in our studio. So RStudio gives us a preview button here, which will put this document together and bring it up in the viewer here, or we can do what's called, we can knit it. We can knit it to a particular type of document, so we can knit it to HTML. Let's just preview it just to show you how it works. We have to save the document before it will preview. So let's save it as an example, as example 2. It's still an RMD file, but it's going to render it to a notebook rather than an HTML file. So it's going to, instead of making this HTML file, it makes this NB HTML file. And it should open it. I thought it opened it in the viewer. It doesn't seem to have done that. Oh, there you go. That's opened it in a browser for me. So this, and this is my final thing. This is a slightly more interactive document than the static HTML that we rendered before. So at the top here, you've got a little code drop down, and you can, from there, you can download the RMarkdown. So it's distributed not just as HTML, but with the RMarkdown itself. We can show the code or hide the code if we want to. So we can hide the little code blocks if we want to. I don't know where my output is. That's unfortunate. Let's close it. Let's make sure we've run everything. Let's run the document. Run all, just to make sure everything's working. And you can see when you run the document, so it runs, when you click run up here, it runs the chunks, and that produces the output in line as well in the code editor, which I forgot about actually. I should have shown you that before. So we're seeing the output there from our different chunks, including a little interactive table here. So this is a nice little interactive table. And then if we get the preview now, we can see, as well as seeing the code, we can actually see the output of the code because we've actually now run the code. So the notebook is a more interactive document, and there in our notebook we get a nice little interactive table, and actually it's a bit nicer than the table produced by the cable, by the knitter package, by the cable function before, because it's a bit more interactive. So we can click through the different columns of the table, and we can also, it's also paginated, and we can click through the rows as well. So that's quite a nice view of that data then. The other thing, which I haven't had time for, and I really do need to stop because it's nearly 5:10. The other thing which I haven't had time for is ggplotly works as well. So you can, our interactive figures that we were producing, you can render in these HTML notebooks, and they will be interactive. You can hover over them and you can zoom in on them and all sorts of other things besides. They will still grind your machine to a shuddering halt if they're too big, if they've got too many points in. What I was going to do if I'd had time was put in an interactive PCA plot into here, but I haven't had time to do it. But I am going to stop now because otherwise I could go on forever. And my live stream is now 1 hour and 10 minutes, and that seems like quite a long time. So with that, I will wrap up and sign off, and hopefully that's been useful to people. And it kind of is, notebooks, RMarkdown notebooks are the way that, generally speaking, when I'm developing a new analysis, this is how I work, in a notebook, rather than writing a vanilla script. Okay, so I'm going to stop and let everybody go and enjoy the rest of their Friday and their weekend. As I've said before, I'm not going to be live streaming next week. I'm going to take a week off, so I will be back on the, I think it's the 1st of June. Will be my next live stream, and At which point we will start something brand new, and keep an eye on Slack if you're on the Slack. If not, look for the sign up link, which is around, and also I'll put stuff on Twitter as well. So just keep an eye, and then we'll start something new in June. So goodbye, everybody. See you later. Have a good break.